The sterile white chamber hummed with recording equipment as Velthari adjusted her damaged breathing apparatus. The device wheezed with each breath, constant reminder of the plasma burns she'd suffered during the final battle above Earth's moon. Across the metal table sat Commander Yuna, her dark eyes unwavering as she activated the translation device. The Korean woman's uniform bore no decorations, but Velthari knew better than to underestimate her. This human had personally led the assault on 3 Kalahari command ships. "State your name and former position for the record," Yuna said coldly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much death. "Velthari of the 9th Caste, former strategic analyst for the Kalahari Empire." The alien's voice crackled through the translator, each word carefully chosen. Her forearms trembled slightly as she spoke. I was there when we first encountered your kind." The chamber fell silent, except for the soft whir of recording devices. 2 guards stood motionless by the door, their weapons powered but not drawn. Captain Jinho leaned forward from his position by the wall, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. The burn marks on his neck told their own story of close combat with Kalahari energy weapons. "Tell us about the Proxima colony attack," Jinho said, his tone neutral, but his eyes burning with barely contained anger. Velthari's forearms trembled, her chitinous exoskeleton clicking softly as she shifted in the specially designed chair. Her compound eyes reflected the harsh lighting, making her appear even more alien in the sterile environment. "We thought it would be simple, another primitive world to absorb into the Empire. Your people had barely reached their nearest star. How could such creatures pose any threat?" She paused, mandibles clicking nervously as she remembered. The intelligence reports were clear. Humans were slow, weak, bound by gravity. Your weapons were crude projectile systems. Their ships burned chemical fuel like ancient relics. The Kalahari High Command classified Earth as a Category 5 civilization, barely worth the fuel costs for conquest. Commander Yuna's expression didn't change, but her fingers tapped once against the table. "What changed your mind?" she asked. "Everything." Velthari's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The alien's primary arms gestured weakly as she continued. "I was aboard the Dominion Fist, our lead dreadnought, when we entered your Proxima system. Fleet Admiral Kethrin had brought 47 capital ships, enough firepower to crack a moon. We expected to find a few mining stations and maybe some cargo haulers." She stopped speaking, her breathing apparatus working harder. The trauma was clearly visible, even across species lines. "Instead, we found something impossible. Your colonists had somehow detected our approach 3 weeks early. They'd evacuated all non-combatants, but the defenders who remained... Double quotes. Velthari shuddered. They had turned asteroids into weapons platforms. Civilian mining equipment had been converted into magnetic railguns. Cargo ships were rigged as kinetic missiles. Captain Jinho stepped closer to the table. "Our people were defending their homes." "No, you don't understand," Velthari said urgently, all forearms gesturing now. "Defense implies survival instinct, retreat when overwhelmed. What we encountered was something else entirely, something we had no word for in any of our 17 conquered languages." Looked directly at Commander Yuna. "Your mining foreman, a man named Kwang Zhu, had welded himself into the control seat of an ore processor. When our fighters strafed his position, he used the industrial laser to cut through our squadron leader's shields. He died in the explosion, but he took 6 of our best pilots with him." The alien's voice grew more agitated. "That should have been an isolated incident, one desperate fool making a meaningless gesture before inevitable defeat. But it wasn't isolated. It was coordinated, planned. Your entire colony had become a weapon." Velthari's compound eyes fixated on a point beyond the walls. Children barely old enough to walk were helping to load ammunition.
Elderly.
Humans too frail to fight were calculating firing solutions with mathematical precision we'd never seen. From a primitive species, and your soldiers. She fell silent for long moments. "What about our soldiers?" Yuna prompted. "Private Changho was 17 years old, according to our scans. He'd never left his home planet before the war. When our drop troops cornered him in Supply Station 7, he was wounded, alone, cut off from support. Any rational being would have surrendered. Velthari's breathing apparatus wheezed louder. Instead, he activated the station's fusion reactor, overloaded and barricaded himself in the control room, transmitted a final message to your command. Tell my mother I kept my promise. Then he waited. What promise? Jinho asked quietly. To protect his little sister Marae's drawings. They were stuck to the control room wall. Pictures of flowers and rainbows, signed with a child's handwriting. He died defending children's artwork as fiercely as he would have defended a military installation. The chamber fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of recording equipment. Commander Yuna's expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. A remembrance of her own losses. That's when we realized, Velthari continued, we weren't fighting a military force. We were fighting an entire species that refused to accept defeat. The orbital bombardment was meant to demonstrate our power, Velthari continued, her voice growing quieter. The alien's damaged breathing apparatus wheezed as she relived the memory. We destroyed 3 of your military installations from space. The barracks, the communications center, and your main defense grid. Standard protocol demanded immediate surrender within 6 hours. Major Han crossed his arms, the scars on his forearms visible beneath rolled sleeves. He'd been there during the bombardment, watching from the underground bunkers as the sky lit up with alien fire. But that's not what happened. No. Velthari's compound eyes clouded with memory, her forearms trembling as she spoke. Instead of surrender signals, we received something else entirely. Your Colonel Minho broadcast a single message across all frequencies using our own communication systems that he'd somehow hacked. The message was simple, spoken in perfect Kalahari. Come down here and try that again. She paused, mandibles clicking nervously. The sound echoed in the sterile chamber, like broken glass. Fleet Admiral Kethrin laughed when he heard it. He called it the desperate bravado of a dying species. We had 40,000 drop troops ready to deploy. Humans had maybe 3,000 defenders left after the bombardment. Captain Ginho stepped forward, his boots clicking against the metal floor. What did your admiral expect to find? Broken survivors hiding in rubble, begging for mercy, Velthari replied. When our dropships descended through your atmosphere, our sensors showed heat signatures scattered throughout the colony. Disorganized, we thought. Panicked civilians running for shelter. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. We were so wrong. The alien's primary arms gestured as she continued. The first wave of dropships touched down in what your maps called Market Square. 24 assault craft, each carrying 40 elite shock troops. The square was empty, silent. Our squad leaders reported no resistance, no movement. They began. Standard deployment procedures. Then the ground exploded. Major Hyan's jaw tightened. He remembered the sound, the way the earth had shaken even from their underground position. Private Deho was just a maintenance worker according to our intelligence, Velthari said, her voice filled with something that might have been respect. He'd spent 3 days digging tunnels under that square, filling them with mining charges from the asteroid processing plant. When our troops reached the center of the square, he triggered everything at once. She fell silent for a moment, breathing heavily. The explosion created a crater 30 meters wide. We lost 200 soldiers in seconds. But that wasn't the worst part. What was the worst part? Commander Yuna asked. The laughter. Velthari's exoskeleton clicked as she shivered. Yes. Our remaining troops stumbled from the wreckage. They heard human laughter echoing from the buildings around the square. Not the desperate laughter of madness, but the satisfied laughter of a job well done. Captain Jinho's expression hardened. Our people were defending their homes. Your people were doing something we'd never encountered in 3,000 years. Of conquest, Velthari replied, her forearms spreading wide. They were refusing to die quietly. The alien continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. The second wave of dropships tried to land in the industrial sector. Sergeant Bongsu was waiting for them. He'd been a factory supervisor before. The war, responsible for maintaining the automated assembly lines. When our ships came down, he activated every piece of heavy machinery in the district. Cargo loaders became battering rams. Welding robots turned into flamethrowers. Assembly line conveyors became troop transport systems, carrying our soldiers directly into kill zones. Bong Su controlled it all from a reinforced bunker, turning an entire factory complex into a mechanical nightmare. Velthari's compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights as she remembered. We lost 8 more dropships before we figured out what was happening. Our pilots reported that the machinery was moving with tactical intelligence, coordinating attacks, like a living organism. Then came the third wave, she continued. By then, our commanders were furious. They deployed our best troops to the residential district, thinking civilians would be easier targets. Her voice cracked slightly. They met Corporal Sun Wu. Sun Wu was a kindergarten teacher, Major Han said quietly, never held a weapon. Before the war started, she'd barricaded herself in the school building with 37 children, Velthari replied. When our soldiers surrounded the building, she opened fire with a hunting rifle. It's not random shots, but precision targeting that would have impressed our military instructors. The aliens' breathing apparatus worked harder as she relived the memory. She held them off for 6 hours, moving through the building like a ghost. Every time our troops thought they had her cornered, she'd appear somewhere else. The children were evacuating through tunnels she'd somehow dug in 3 days. What happened to her? Commander Yuna asked. She ran out of ammunition, just as the last child reached safety, Velthari said. Our soldiers found her in the classroom, sitting at a tiny desk covered with children's drawings. She'd written a message on the blackboard. Math lesson complete. Next class, survival. The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical hum of recording equipment. Velthari's forearms trembled as she continued. That's when we realized the heat signatures our sensors had detected weren't panicked civilians. They were carefully positioned defenders who'd turned their entire colony into a fortress. Every building was trapped. Every street was an ambush point. Your people had done something impossible. What? Captain Jinho asked. They'd weaponized hope itself. The siege of Kepler Station lasted 8 months, Velthari continued, her voice barely above a whisper. The aliens' damage-breathing apparatus struggled with each word, creating an eerie rhythm in the silent chamber. We brought 40,000 troops from across the Kalahari Empire, elite warriors, veteran shock troops, the finest soldiers from a dozen conquered worlds. You had maybe 3,000 defenders. Lieutenant Nari looked up from her tablet, stylus hovering over the digital display. Her young face bore the hardened expression of someone who'd aged years in months of warfare. Our records show similar numbers. What? Numbers don't tell the story, Velthari replied, her forearms gesturing weakly. What your records don't show is how those 3,000 defenders held us back for 243 days. How they turned every corridor into a killing field, every room into a fortress. She paused, compound eyes reflecting the harsh lighting as memories flooded back. The station's central hub became a maze of death. Your engineers had somehow rewired the artificial gravity generators to create pockets of crushing force and weightless zones. Our troops would charge down a hallway at normal gravity, and suddenly find themselves floating helplessly or pressed against the floor by forces that could crush bones. Captain Ginho leaned against the wall, his scarred hands clasped behind his back. Innovative tactics? Innovative? Altharius' mandibles clicked rapidly. What Captain Young-ho did wasn't innovative, it was impossible. He reprogrammed the stations, maintenance robots to become autonomous weapons. Cleaning units became bomb carriers. Repair drones turned into flying razors. The very infrastructure became hostile. Her voice grew more agitated as she continued. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the psychological warfare. Your people had learned our communication frequencies and began broadcasting into our helmet systems. Not threats or demands for surrender. Something far more disturbing. What did they broadcast? Commander Yuna asked. Children's songs, Velthari whispered. Lullabies sung by human younglings who had died in our bombardments. The voices of the dead, asking why we had come to hurt them. Our hardened warriors, soldiers who had conquered entire star systems, began breaking down after hearing those songs. Lieutenant Nari set down her tablet. That's not in our tactical reports. Because it wasn't officially sanctioned, Velthari explained. Private Hyjin had lost her younger brother in the initial attack. She'd found recordings on his personal device. songs he'd recorded for their baby sister back on Earth. She somehow accessed our communication networks and played them on loop during our night cycles. The alien's breathing apparatus wheezed louder. As she relived the memory, sleep became impossible. Our troops began reporting hallucinations, phantom voices calling their names. Command ordered communication blackouts, but your humans adapted. They began leaving physical messages carved into the walls where our patrols would find them. What kind of messages? Major Hayan asked. Pictures? Drawings made by human children before they died? Stick figures holding hands under crayon suns? Messages like "Thank you for keeping us safe" written in a child's handwriting. Velthari's voice cracked. Our soldiers weren't prepared for psychological warfare that attacked their protective instincts instead of their fears. Her forearms trembled as she continued. But what your records don't show is what Sergeant Wubin did on day 47. Velthari's entire body shuddered, exoskeleton clicking with nervous energy. He was wounded, surrounded, cut off from his unit in Section C7. Any rational being would have surrendered. But he didn't, Eunice stated, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood sacrifice. He booby-trapped himself, Velthari said, each word coming with obvious difficulty. When our soldiers found him, he was sitting against a wall, apparently dying from plasma burns. His weapon was broken, his communication unit destroyed. He looked defeated, harmless. She stopped speaking, breathing apparatus working overtime. The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical sounds of recording equipment. They approached to take him prisoner, she finally continued. Standard procedure for gathering intelligence. He was conscious, seemed cooperative, even smiled at them. Her voice dropped to barely audible. The explosion killed 12 of our finest warriors. The blast was so precise, so calculated, that it collapsed the ceiling without damaging the structural supports. Velthari looked directly at Major Hain. We found his final message carved into the wall, behind where he'd been sitting. For Minji's kindergarten class? Major Hayan frowned, though something flickered in his eyes. Minji, his daughter, she died in the initial bombardment along with 30 other children from the station's education center. Velthari's voice cracked completely. We accessed his personal files after the battle. He'd been the volunteer art teacher, spending his off-duty hours helping children draw pictures of Earth they'd never seen. The alien's compound eyes seemed too dim. That's when we realized we weren't fighting soldiers. We were fighting a species that would literally die before letting us harm their young. Her forearms gestured helplessly. The worst part was Private Soyang. She was barely 18 by your years, trapped in a collapsed building for 6 days after a plasma strike brought down the residential block. When we finally broke through the rubble, we expected to find a corpse, but she was alive, Lieutenant Nari asked. Barely. She had used her own blood to write targeting coordinates on the walls around her, mathematical calculations for artillery strikes, trajectory paths, impact zones. All written in perfect precision despite her injuries. Velthari's voice became hollow. She died with a communication device in her hand, calling in strikes on her own position to stop our advance through that sector. The chamber fell silent. Commander Yuna's expression remained neutral, but her hands had clenched into fists. Her final transmission was logged by your command center, Velthari continued. She said, "Tell my mom I solved the math problem."
Oh.
The answer is hope. Everything changed when Admiral Taiyang arrived with the Terra fleet, Velthari said, now visibly shaking. Her forearms wrapped around herself as if trying to hold together against the memories. We thought we understood human warfare after 8 months of siege. We were wrong. The alien's breathing apparatus wheezed harder as she continued. Our long-range sensors detected the human fleet 3 days before they reached Kepler Station. 57 ships against our orbital armada of 120 vessels. Fleet Admiral Kethrin was confident. He'd been fighting primitives on the ground, but space combat was different. This was where Kalahari superiority would shine. Lieutenant, Nari looked up from her tablet. What was different about Admiral Taiyang's approach? The Admiral had studied our tactics for months while we were bogged down on Kepler, Velthari replied. He'd analyzed every engagement, every weapons signature, every communication intercept. When his ships appeared at the edge of the system, they didn't engage us in traditional space combat. Instead, they did something impossible. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber's harsh lighting as she relived the moment. The human fleet split into 7 groups, each taking a different vector toward our position. Standard flanking maneuver, we thought. Our tactical computers calculated. Interception courses. Moved to engage the largest group first. Captain Ginho leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the back of a chair. "What did they do?" "They vanished," Belthari whispered. "It's not cloaking technology, nothing sophisticated. They simply powered down everything except life support and drifted. In the darkness of space, they became invisible to our sensors." Paused, mandibles clicking nervously. For 6 hours, we searched for phantom ships. Our patrols found nothing. Admiral Kethron began to think the humans had retreated. Then Engineer Jejun's trap activated. "What trap?" Commander Yuna asked. The human ships hadn't retreated. It attached themselves to our own vessels using magnetic clamps and spacewalks. While we searched empty space, they were cutting through our hulls like parasites. Valtharius' voice grew more agitated, but that wasn't the worst part. They used our own gravity weapons against us, but not the way they were designed. Her forearms gestured frantically. Our gravity disruptors were meant for ship-to-ship combat, creating spatial distortions to tear enemy vessels apart. Engineer Jaeon had somehow modified the frequency to disrupt our neural networks instead of metal hulls. "How is that possible?" Major Haon asked. "We still don't know," Valthari admitted. "Our scientists spent years trying to understand it." Jaeon was a civilian engineer from a mining operation before the war. He'd worked with gravitational equipment for asteroid processing. Somehow he'd discovered that our brain chemistry was vulnerable to specific frequency modulations. She shuddered as she continued. "Half our crew was incapacitated before we even understood what was happening. Warriors with decades of combat experience suddenly couldn't stand upright. Others began experiencing severe disorientation, unable to distinguish up from down in zero gravity. The alien's breathing apparatus worked overtime as she relived the terror. The Dominion Fist, our flagship, was completely helpless within minutes. Emergency power failed. Weapons systems went offline. Our elite bridge crew was writhing on the floor, unable to function. Then came the boarding parties, she continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Lieutenant Yunji led a squad of Marines onto our flagship through a hull breach they'd cut in the cargo bay. Our warriors are bred for combat, trained from birth in zero-gravity warfare. Your lieutenant was a communications officer who'd never seen battle before the war started. Valthari paused, struggling with the memory. Her compound eyes seemed to lose focus as she spoke. She moved through our ship like a force of nature. Not the calculated precision of a trained soldier, but something more primal, more desperate. "Do you mean Lieutenant Nari?" asked. "She fought like someone who had nothing left to lose," Valthari explained. "When our security forces tried to stop her squad in the main corridor, she didn't take cover or call for support. She charged directly at a heavy plasma cannon, using her own body as a shield for her Marines." The alien's voice cracked. "The plasma burst should have killed her instantly. Instead, it just burned through her left shoulder. She kept moving, kept firing, kept advancing. Her squad followed her like she was invincible." Captain Jinho's expression hardened. Adrenaline and determination can make anyone seem invincible. "No, this was different," Valthari insisted. "She took our bridge with 7 soldiers against 40 of our elite guard. Not through superior tactics or better weapons, but through pure, unrelenting fury." Her forearms trembled as she continued. "When the battle was over, when our ship was captured, I asked her why she fought so viciously. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death and told me about a place called Busan Elementary School. The school you bombed on day 1. Yuna said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of shared grief. Her nephew attended there, little boy named Minsu, 5 years old. Valthari's voice broke completely. She said she could still hear his laugh when she closed her eyes. How he'd call her Aunt Yunji and show her his drawings of spaceships and aliens that looked friendly instead of threatening. The chamber fell silent except for the mechanical hum of recording equipment. Velthari's breathing apparatus wheezed. As she struggled to continue, she told me that Minsu had been excited about the aliens coming to visit. He thought we'd be like the creatures in his picture books, bringing gifts and stories from distant stars. The alien's voice became hollow. She said she'd promised to protect his innocent view of the universe. That's when I understood, Velthari whispered. We hadn't just attacked your military installations or strategic positions. We had awakened something primal in your entire species. Every human who fought us was fighting for a specific face, a specific voice, a specific memory of innocence lost. Her compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights as she looked directly at Commander Yuna. Lieutenant Yunji didn't see enemy soldiers. When she looked at us, she saw the creatures who had silenced her nephew's laughter forever. And that, Velthari concluded, made her the most dangerous opponent we'd ever faced. The war could have continued for decades, Velthari said as the interview drew to a close. Her damaged breathing apparatus creating a rhythmic wheeze that filled the sterile chamber. But General Sujin made a choice that saved both our species. Alien's 4 arms gestured weakly as she continued, compound eyes reflecting the harsh lighting. After the Terra Fleet's victory at Kepler Station, your forces moved like a wave of vengeance across our occupied territories. Planet after planet fell to human counterattacks. Our generals kept expecting you to slow down, to consolidate your gains, to negotiate. She paused, mandibles clicking nervously. Instead, you accelerated. Every victory seemed to fuel greater fury. Captain Sungman's assault on the Vorthan mining colony lasted only 6 hours. What should have been a month-long siege ended when his engineers somehow turned the planet's own atmospheric processors into weapons, creating localized storms that grounded our air support. Lieutenant Nari looked up from her tablet, stylus. Frozen over the display? Our records show minimal casualties in that engagement. Because we surrendered immediately, Velthari explained, her voice growing more agitated. Word had spread through our ranks about what happened to forces that fought to the last soldier. Major Jiwan's Marines at the Kepler asteroid belt had shown no mercy to units that refused to yield. Captain Jinho stepped closer to the table. You make it sound like we were the aggressors. No, you misunderstand, Velthari replied quickly, 4 arms raised in a defensive gesture. You were justice incarnate. When your forces reached our homeworld, every military analyst predicted total annihilation. We had killed so many of your people, destroyed so many of your worlds. Justice demanded genocide. Her breathing apparatus worked harder as she relived the memory. The human fleet that appeared in our star system was unlike anything we'd ever seen. 200 ships, each one bearing scars from previous battles. The lead dreadnought, Righteous Fury, had been Admiral Taiyang's flagship during the siege-breaking operations. Lieutenant Nari looked confused. But that's not what happened. No, Velthari whispered. General Sujin stood on the bridge of that ship, surrounded by weapons systems carrying enough firepower to sterilize our planet. Our long-range sensors detected fusion missiles, plasma bombardment arrays, kinetic impactors that could crack continental plates. She fell silent for long moments, struggling with the memory. Our High Council was in chaos. Some wanted to fight to the death. Others begged for negotiation. Admiral Catherine, what was left of him after the neural disruption attacks? You advocated for immediate evacuation of our leadership caste. What did General Sujin offer? Commander Yuna asked. A choice so simple it was terrifying, Velthari replied. He broadcast a single message to every receiver on our planet. Unconditional surrender and immediate withdrawal from all human territories, or complete extinction. No negotiation. No compromise. 6 hours to decide. Her compound eyes seemed too dim as she continued. We chose surrender. Our entire civilization, 3,000 years of conquest and expansion, ended with a single transmission. We yield. But that wasn't the remarkable part, she said, voice growing stronger. The remarkable part was what happened next. Velthari stood slowly, her damaged limbs struggling with the movement, exoskeleton clicking with the effort. Within hours of our surrender, Human transport ships began landing in our major cities. Not invasion forces or occupation troops. Medical personnel. She looked directly at Commander Yuna. Dr. Hannah was among the first humans to set foot on our world after the surrender. I was in the emergency medical center, recovering from injuries. Sustained during the final space battle, she walked through the doors like an angel of mercy. "Tell them about Dr. Hannah," Major Heian said quietly. Her husband, Captain Dong Yoon, had died at Kepler Station during the siege. Her son, Private Kung Su, died defending the Mars colonies from our third-wave assault. Belthari's voice cracked with emotion. She had every reason to hate us, to let us suffer and die from our wounds. The alien's forearms trembled as she continued. Instead, she established field hospitals throughout our capital city. She treated our wounded soldiers, our injured civilians, even the prisoners who had been captured during failed escape attempts. When I asked her why, Velthari said, voice barely above a whisper, she was cleaning infected wounds on a Kalahari. A child who'd been hurt during the bombardment. She looked at me with eyes that had seen too much death and said something that haunts me still. This is what humans do. We fight like demons to protect our families, then we heal whoever remains. Chamber fell silent, except for the mechanical sounds of recording equipment. Velthari's breathing apparatus wheezed as she struggled to continue. Dr. Hannah worked 18-hour shifts for weeks, saving lives without regard for species or allegiance. When our medical supplies ran low, she contacted the human fleet and requested additional resources. Not for her own people, but for us. Velthari faced the recording camera directly, her compound eyes reflecting the lights like fractured mirrors. Let this testimony serve as a warning to any species considering aggression against humanity. They will endure losses that would break any other race. They will adapt to your weapons faster than you can deploy them. They'll turn your own technology against you in ways you never imagined possible. Her voice grew stronger, more urgent. But most terrifying of all, if you somehow manage to survive their wrath, they will show you mercy you do not deserve. They will heal you, feed you, and send you home to warn others. I have studied warfare across the galaxy for centuries, she continued, forearms spreading wide. I have analyzed conflicts involving 47 different species. I have never encountered anything as dangerous as a human with something to protect, or as noble as a human with the power to destroy their enemies who chooses compassion instead. Belthari's breathing apparatus worked overtime as emotion overwhelmed her. The human warfront was pure hell because humans brought something to battle that we had never faced, the willingness to sacrifice everything for others, followed by the wisdom to spare their defeated enemies. We started this war thinking we were predators hunting prey, she said, voice breaking completely. We learned too late that we had stumbled into the territory of the galaxy's apex protectors. The alien bowed her head in a gesture of respect, exoskeleton clicking softly in the silence. Humanity didn't just defeat the Kalahari Empire, she whispered. They taught us what it means to be civilized. Velthari looked up one final time, compound eyes glistening under the harsh lights. The greatest victory wasn't military. It was moral. You showed us that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to rebuild. It's the end.